Hey everyone, I am Roseheart. Before we dive into today's story, it would mean the world if you could hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. It really helps the channel grow and keeps these stories coming. The stagecoach lurched, throwing Vivienne against the padded seat. She gripped the worn leather, knuckles white, as the opulent gates of Prescott Manor receded into the distance. Each rotation of the wheels was a defiant drumbeat, a promise whispered on the wind, I am leaving. I am free. Only hours before, the ballroom had pulsed with forced gaiety. The Prescott crest, emblazoned on every available surface, seemed to mock her. Champagne flutes tinkled a hollow symphony, celebrating a union she dreaded. Frederick Huntington, her betrothed, had stood beside her, a possessive hand resting on her waist. His smile was practiced, his eyes cold, assessing her market value like a prize bull. Flashback, you look lovely, my dear, Frederick had murmured, his breath smelling faintly of brandy and cigars. Vivienne forced a smile. Thank you, Frederick. Soon, all of this will be yours. He gestured around the ballroom, taking in the glittering chandeliers, the impeccably dressed guests, the overflowing tables laden with delicacies. And you, my dear Vivienne, will be mine. She felt a chill despite the warmth of the room. I understand, she'd replied, the words catching in her throat. Her mother, a vision in emerald silk and diamonds, had glided towards them, her smile tight. Vivienne, darling, do try to look happier. This is a celebration, not a funeral. Of course, mother. Vivienne dipped her head, the weight of the Prescott name pressing down on her like a physical burden. Later, trapped in a corner by Lady Beatrice, a woman whose voice could curdle milk, Vivienne had felt the walls closing in. Lady Beatrice, her face a road map of wrinkles and disapproval, fixed her with a beady stare. Such a fortunate match, Vivienne, she'd croaked. Frederick is stable. And stability, my dear, is what a woman needs. Vivienne had wanted to scream. Stability. Was that all she was worth? A gilded cage, lined with silk, and fueled by societal expectations? End flashback now. The silk was gone. She wore a simple travelling dress, its practicality a stark contrast to the elaborate gowns she'd left behind. The pearls, a Huntington family heirloom, lay buried at the bottom of her carpet bag, a symbolic burial of her former life. The stagecoach rattled on, the scenery blurring into a tapestry of green fields and distant hills. Vivienne leaned her head against the window, the rhythmic clatter a strange comfort. She was running towards the unknown, towards a life she couldn't yet define, but one she knew, with a certainty that resonated deep in her soul, was hers to create. That night, under the cold light of a sliver moon, she stopped at a dusty way station. The air smelled of wood smoke and horses, a far cry from the perfumed salons of Prescott Manor. Inside, the rough-hewn walls were adorned with faded posters, and the air thick with the scent of stale beer. Men with weathered faces and calloused hands eyed her with open curiosity. Vivienne ignored them. She purchased a room, a small Spartan space with a narrow bed and a cracked mirror, and locked the door behind her. She stared at her reflection. The woman in the mirror was a stranger, her face pale and drawn, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. She reached for the small pair of scissors she'd secreted away in her bag. With a deep breath, she began to cut. Strands of auburn hair fell to the floor, each snip a severance from the life she was leaving behind. The elaborate coiffure, painstakingly crafted by her maid each morning, was gone, replaced by a shorter, more practical style that framed her face. When she was finished, she stared at her reflection again. The stranger was still there, but there was something different about her now. A flicker of defiance, a spark of hope, a nascent strength that had been hidden beneath layers of expectation and obligation. She gathered the fallen hair, wrapping it in a piece of linen. It was a memento, a reminder of the woman she had been, and a symbol of the woman she was determined to become. The next morning, she purchased a sturdy mare, a saddle, and a map of the Western Territories. The stagecoach would take her only so far. The rest of her journey, she realized, she would have to make on her own. The journey west was arduous. The sun beat down mercilessly, the wind whipped her hair across her face, and the landscape stretched endlessly before her. She learned to navigate by the stars, to read the signs of the land, to trust her instincts. She slept under the open sky, the vastness of the universe both terrifying and liberating. She ate simple meals of dried meat and hardtack, her palate slowly adjusting to the unrefined flavors. She encountered other travelers, prospectors, farmers, drifters, each with their own stories, their own dreams, their own reasons for seeking a new life in the West. One evening, as she sat by a crackling campfire, a grizzled old prospector named Jebediah shared his philosophy with her. "Out here, girl," he said, his voice raspy from years of whiskey and wind. "You're not judged by who your daddy was, or how much money you got. You're judged by what you can do, by how tough you are, by whether you can pull your own weight." His words resonated with her. That was exactly what she wanted to be judged, not by her name or her lineage, but by her actions, by her character, by her own merits. After weeks of travel, her horse, nearing exhaustion, finally faltered just outside the borders of a struggling ranch. Vivienne dismounted, stroking the mare's neck. "Easy, girl," she soothed, noticing the horse was favoring its left foreleg. "We'll get you some water." She glanced around. A dilapidated fence surrounded a parched field. A weathered barn leaned precariously to one side. In the distance, a small, run-down house sat baking under the relentless sun. It was hardly the grand estate she had left behind, but something about this place, this desolate, struggling ranch, resonated with her. Perhaps it was the air of quiet desperation, the sense of a place clinging to survival against all odds. Or perhaps it was simply the fact that it was the only place she had found after weeks of relentless travel. Whatever the reason, Vivienne knew, with a strange sense of certainty, that her journey had led her here. This was where she was meant to be. Dust and ashes, the sun beat down on Colt's weathered face, baking the dust that clung to his skin. He squinted, his gaze sweeping across the cracked earth. The land, once his father's pride and joy, was now a parched canvas of despair. Months without rain had turned the creek bed into a ribbon of dry, flaky mud. Even the hardy sagebrush seemed to droop under the relentless assault of the sun. He spat a stream of brown tobacco juice onto the ground, the sound swallowed by the vast emptiness. The cattle were thin, their ribs showing like the rungs of a ladder. He'd already sold half the herd just to keep the rest alive, a decision that felt like carving pieces from his own soul. He kicked at a loose stone, sending it skittering across the barren landscape. "Damn this forsaken land," he muttered, the words a low growl lost in the wind. The wind, a constant companion, carried the scent of dry earth and the faint metallic tang of blood from where he'd been mending fences earlier. A coyote had been at the wire, trying to get at the few remaining chickens. He chased it off, but not before it had drawn blood from his hand. He ignored the sting. Pain was just another part of life out here. He walked towards the broken fence, the wood splintered and bleached by the sun. He picked up a hammer, the worn handle fitting snugly in his calloused hand. With practiced movements, he began to drive new posts into the ground, the rhythmic thud echoing in the stillness. Each swing was a release, a momentary escape from the crushing weight of his reality. His thoughts drifted, as they often did, to Sarah and little Billy. He could almost see Sarah's smile, hear Billy's infectious laughter. They had loved this land, seen its potential even when times were tough. He remembered Sarah planting wildflowers near the house, a splash of colour against the muted landscape. They were all gone now, taken by the fever that had swept through the valley 3 years ago. He hammered another post, the force of the blow nearly splitting the wood. He hadn't allowed himself to grieve properly, too busy trying to keep the ranch afloat. The ranch, it was all he had left of them. He couldn't lose it. He wouldn't. He worked until the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. The air cooled slightly, offering a brief respite from the day's heat. He cleaned his tools and headed towards the small, dilapidated shack that served as his home. Inside, the air was stale and heavy. Dust motes danced in the faint light filtering through the grimy window. The furniture was sparse: a rickety table, a couple of chairs, and a bed covered with a threadbare quilt. A rifle leaned against the wall near the door. He lit a kerosene lamp, casting a warm glow that pushed back the encroaching darkness. He poured himself a cup of lukewarm coffee from a pot that sat perpetually on the stove. The coffee was bitter and weak, but it was something. He sat at the table, staring out the window. The stars were beginning to appear, twinkling like diamonds, scattered across a black velvet cloth. He wondered what Sarah and Billy were doing, if they were watching him from above. After a while he rose and walked out into the night. He headed towards the small rise behind the house, the only spot on the ranch where the ground wasn't completely barren. 2 weathered wooden crosses stood side by side, their paint peeling and faded. He knelt before them, his head bowed. "Evening, Sarah," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "Evening, Billy." He ran a calloused hand over the rough-hewn wood of Sarah's cross. "Things are tough," he admitted. "Real tough." He was a man of few words, especially when it came to his feelings. But standing there, under the vast expanse of the starlit sky, he felt a need to talk, to connect with the ones he had lost. "The drought, it's killing us," he continued. "Don't know how much longer I can hold on." He paused, swallowed hard. "But I will. I promise you. I will. I'll keep fighting for this land, for you both." He looked at Billy's cross, so small and fragile. "He would have loved running around here, Sarah," he said, a hint of tenderness in his voice. "Chasing rabbits, riding horses." He stayed there for a long time, lost in his memories. The wind whispered through the tall grass, carrying his unspoken grief into the night. Eventually he stood, his joints aching. He touched each cross one last time before turning and walking back towards the house. As he reached the door, he paused, looking back at the graves. A new resolve hardened his features. He wouldn't give up. He couldn't. He owed it to them, to himself, to this land. He stepped inside, closed the door behind him, and extinguished the lamp, plunging the shack into darkness. The stars, however, continued to shine, a silent promise of a new dawn. He knew the fight for survival would continue, but he was ready. He had to be. Where the road ends, the sun beat down on Vivienne's back, each ray a tiny hammer blow. Dust devils danced in the distance, mocking her dwindling hope. For days she'd pressed onward, fueled by stale biscuits and a stubborn refusal to return to Philadelphia. The vast, unforgiving landscape of the West was a harsh mistress, but a far cry better than the gilded cage that awaited her. Suddenly, Belle, her mare, stumbled, a shudder running through her frame. Vivienne cried out, pulling back on the reins, but it was too late. Belle's legs buckled, and she crashed to the parched earth, kicking up a cloud of dust. Vivienne scrambled down, her heart pounding. "Belle, Belle, are you all right?" The mare lay panting, her eyes wide with pain. Vivienne ran her hands over Belle's legs, finding no obvious breaks, but the animal was clearly exhausted, dehydrated, and favouring her left foreleg. They were stranded. Panic clawed at Vivienne's throat. She scanned the horizon, searching for any sign of civilization. Nothing. Only endless plains, shimmering under the oppressive heat. She had to find help, and soon. Taking a deep breath, Vivienne rummaged through her saddlebags, pulling out her canteen. It was almost empty. She gave the last few drops to Belle, then rose, her legs aching, and started walking in the direction she thought she'd seen a distant stand of trees earlier. Hours later, just as the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues, she saw it. A small, weathered ranch house, smoke curling lazily from its chimney. Relief washed over her, so potent it almost brought her to her knees. Hope renewed, she quickened her pace, stumbling over uneven ground. As she drew closer, she could make out a small corral, a dilapidated barn, and a man leaning against the porch railing, his figure silhouetted against the fading light. He was tall and lean, with broad shoulders and a stance that spoke of both weariness and strength. He wore a faded blue shirt, patched denim jeans, and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face. This had to be Colt Morrison. Swallowing her nervousness, Vivienne approached the porch. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice hoarse. "I need help." The man didn't move, didn't speak. He simply watched her, his eyes hidden beneath the brim of his hat. She continued, stepping closer. "My horse, she collapsed. Just a few miles back. I need water, and help getting her here." He remained silent for a long moment, then finally straightened, his gaze piercing. "Who are you?" His voice was gravelly, devoid of warmth. "My name is Vivienne Prescott." She hesitated, then added, "I was on my way west." And "West?" he scoffed, pushing himself off the railing. "This ain't the way west. This is where the road ends." He stepped off the porch, his boots thudding softly on the wooden planks. He closed the distance between them. Close up, Vivienne could see the lines etched around his eyes, the harsh set of his jaw. He was younger than she'd initially thought, but life had aged him beyond his years. I lost my way," she admitted, feeling a flush of embarrassment creep up her neck. "I need help. Please." He studied her, his gaze raking over her dusty travelling clothes, her dishevelled hair. "You don't look like you belong out here. Appearances can be deceiving." Vivienne met his gaze, refusing to back down. "My horse is injured. She needs water and rest. Surely, you can't turn me away." "Why should I?" He folded his arms across his chest, his stance challenging. "What's in it for me?" Vivienne felt a surge of anger. Compassion, perhaps? Basic human decency? He laughed, a short, humourless sound. "Compassion's a luxury I can't afford. Not anymore." He gestured towards the parched fields surrounding the ranch. "You see this? This is my life. Drought's been bleeding it dry for years. I got nothing to spare for strays." "I'm not asking for charity," Vivienne retorted, her voice rising. "I'm willing to pay. I have money." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a handful of coins, offering them to him. He didn't take them. He simply stared at the coins, then back at her. "Where'd a woman like you get money out here?" His eyes narrowed. "Who are you running from?" Vivienne hesitated. The truth, felt too dangerous, too exposing. "That's not important," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "What matters is my horse. Please, help me." He picked up one of the coins, turning it over in his fingers. "Fine," he said finally, his voice grudging. "I'll help you with your horse. But don't think this buys you anything more. You'll earn your keep while you're here. And I want the truth. Sooner or later, it always comes out." He tossed the coin back to her, the silver glinting in the fading light. "Now, let's go get your animal." He turned and headed towards the barn, his silhouette disappearing into the darkness. Vivienne watched him go, a mixture of relief and apprehension swirling within her. She had found help, but at what cost? She suspected Colt Morrison was a man who demanded more than just money. He wanted answers, and she wasn't sure she was ready to give them. But for Belle's sake, and perhaps for her own, she would play his game. At least for now. Silk and soil, the rickety milking stool, threatened to tip on the uneven ground. Vivienne, swallowed by one of Colt's shirts, the only attire remotely suited to the task, balanced on it, her brow furrowed in concentration. Bess, the cow, serenely munched, her placid gaze fixed on Vivienne with what bordered on disdain. "Steady now, Bess," Vivienne breathed, a tremor in her voice. Colt had made this look like second nature. Yet, with the bucket positioned, her hands clamped onto Bess's teats, she achieved nothing. Absolutely nothing. She squeezed harder, and Bess responded with a mournful bellow and a sideways shuffle that nearly sent Vivienne sprawling. A meagre spurt of milk splattered onto Vivienne's boot. She made a face. "Confound it all," she muttered, tucking a stray lock of hair behind her ear. Hopeless, her fingers, more at home with delicate embroidery and fine porcelain, were ill-equipped for the task at hand. She tried again, emulating Colt's assured, rhythmic motions, but Bess remained stubbornly uncooperative. From across the yard, Colt leaned against the barn, observing the scene. A hint of a smile touched his lips. He'd wagered she wouldn't last the week, let alone attempt something like this. She was an enigma, draped in his rough-spun work shirt, yet radiating an unmistakable air of elegance. He'd noticed her flinch at the barn's pungent aroma, the careful way she'd handled the reins of the replacement mare. Yet, she persevered. A surprising resilience simmered beneath the surface. Vivienne abandoned the stall with a sigh of surrender. Sensing her release, Bess lumbered toward the pasture. Vivienne wiped her hands on the borrowed trousers, leaving pale streaks on the worn fabric. She turned toward Colt, her cheeks flushed with exertion and chagrin. "I seem to be floundering rather spectacularly," she conceded, a wry humor coloring her tone. Colt straightened from the barn, his gaze unwavering. "Ranching ain't a cakewalk. Takes practice." "So I'm discovering," she replied, moving toward him. "Perhaps wielding an axe will prove more rewarding?" He arched a brow. "Wood chopping?" "Yes. The pile seems depleted, and I imagined I could contribute." Colt chuckled, a deep, resonant sound that sent a faint tremor through Vivienne. "Contribute? Darlin', you look like you'd shatter an axe handle before you even nick the bark." Vivienne bristled, her chin lifting in defiance. "I assure you, Mr. Morrison, I possess more strength than meets the eye." "All right," he said, amusement dancing in his gaze. "Prove it." He gestured towards the woodpile with a nod. The woodpile was a formidable presence. Vivienne selected an axe that felt manageable, though it was still heavier than anything she had ever lifted. She positioned a log on the chopping block, inhaled deeply, and swung. The axe blade skittered off the side of the log, sending a scattering of splinters. The jarring impact shot up her arms, almost dislodging the axe. She tried again. And again. Each attempt yielded the same irritating outcome, a glancing blow, a burst of wood chips, and the thud of dull metal. Her muscles screamed, her back protested, and blisters blossomed on her hands. Colt remained a silent sentinel by the barn, offering neither guidance nor assistance. He simply watched, his expression inscrutable. After what felt like an age, Vivienne straightened, her chest rising and falling rapidly. She dropped the axe with a clang, the sound amplified in the tranquil afternoon. Sweat beaded on her forehead, stinging her eyes. "Perhaps," she gasped, "ranching is better left to those born to it." Colt finally stirred, crossing the yard toward her. He stopped a few feet away, his presence both imposing and strangely grounding. "You got gumption, I'll give you that," he said, his voice a low rumble. "But gumption don't split logs. It takes know-how." He picked up the axe, hefting its weight with ease. "Observe." In one fluid motion, he found his stance, raised the axe high, and brought it down with a resounding crack. The log cleaved in two. He repeated the process several times, each swing precise and powerful. Vivienne watched, mesmerized by his brute strength and the seamless grace of his movements. The sinews in his arms tightened with each powerful arc, his sun-kissed skin glistening. She found herself strangely transfixed. He paused, swiping his brow with the back of his hand. "See?" he said, turning to face her. "Technique." "Yes," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I see." He offered the axe. "Your turn." Vivienne hesitated, then grasped the handle. She mirrored his stance, his grip, his rhythmic actions. She raised the axe, took a steadying breath, and swung. The axe sunk into the wood, but didn't split it. A slight improvement nonetheless. "Better," Colt conceded, a glimmer of approval in his tone. "Keep at it." Vivienne nodded, resolved to master this skill, not just to impress Colt, but to prove something to herself. As she swung the axe once more, she caught Colt's eye. She saw something unreadable flicker behind his gaze. It was no longer simple amusement. There was something more complex, something that accelerated her pulse. Later that evening, as the sun sank below the peaks, painting the sky in vibrant shades of apricot and rose, Vivienne sat on the porch, soothing her aching limbs. Colt emerged from the barn, his silhouette stark against the dwindling light. He approached, carrying 2 mugs. He handed her one, the steam swirling in the cool evening air. "Coffee," he stated. Vivienne took a sip. It was strong and earthy, but surprisingly fortifying. "Thank you," she murmured, meeting his gaze. They settled into silence for a time, watching the stars begin to speckle the darkening expanse. "Why did you run?" Colt asked, his voice low and rough-edged. Vivienne hesitated. She'd been dreading this question, knowing its inevitability. "It's a rather long tale," she admitted finally. "I got time," he replied. She took another sip of coffee, marshalling her thoughts. How much to reveal? How much could she confide? "I was betrothed," she began, her voice barely there. "To a man I didn't care for. A man my family selected for me." Colt remained silent, listening intently. "I couldn't bear it," she went on. "I couldn't spend my life trapped in a gilded cage, feigning a persona that wasn't authentically me. So you bolted," he stated, confirming the obvious. "Yes," she said. "I bolted, and I harbor no regrets." Colt nodded slowly, his gaze focused on the horizon. "Takes guts to do that," he observed quietly. Vivienne looked at him. scanning his face for any hint of scorn. She found none, only a quiet empathy. "What about you, Mr. Morrison?" she asked, turning the question back on him. "What demons are you trying to outrun?" Ow. He tensed, his expression hardening. The budding camaraderie between them dissipated, replaced by a wall of guardedness. "That's a story for another time," he said, his voice flat. Vivienne nodded, respecting his boundaries. She knew she had overstepped. They lapsed into silence once more, the unspoken secrets hanging between them like a shroud. The stars blazed brighter now, illuminating the vast desolation of the west. Vivienne recognized that she had a long and arduous path ahead, much to assimilate, and a history that would eventually find her. Yet, in that moment, perched on the porch, alongside Colt Morrison, she experienced a sense of tranquility she hadn't felt in years. She was no longer Vivienne Prescott, the darling of society. She was simply Vivienne, a woman seeking a new existence, a second chance. And perhaps, just perhaps, she had discovered it here, in this rugged and unforgiving landscape. Ghosts of the past, the porch swing emitted a lulling squeak. The only sound after Colt's confession lingered in the twilight. The horizon blazed, a canvas of plum and molten gold. Vivienne absorbed the fading light, his words echoing in her mind, his anguish mirrored in her own expression. "I'm so sorry, Colt," she finally breathed, the sentiment falling short of the immensity she felt. I can scarcely imagine he dismissed her with a stiff shrug. "Don't. No need. It's buried in the past." But the past clung to him like a shroud etched in the weathered crags around his eyes, the rigid set of his shoulders, an invisible weight he carried. A sudden realization struck Vivienne. She couldn't claim to grasp the depths of his suffering, but she could offer her own scars. "My life wasn't always defined by chores and barnyard routines," she offered, her voice barely a whisper. A mirthless snort escaped Colt. Understatement of the year. Ignoring the barb, she pressed on, needing him to comprehend her presence, the yearning for connection that superseded mere emptiness. "I was promised a way." She confessed, the phrase leaving a bitter taste in her mouth. The memory flooded back. The Prescott family drawing room felt stifling, heavy with the aroma of lilies and unspoken demands. Vivienne stood before her parents, posture rigid, chin high, her silk gown concealing tightly clenched fists. "Vivienne, darling, please, be sensible," her mother urged, her voice a silken counterpoint to the flint in her gaze. "Sensible? You call bartering me to a man I loathe sensible?" Vivienne shot back, a tremor betraying her forced composure. "He's a duke, Vivienne," her father thundered, his face reddening. "He offers security, a life of ease and standing. Something you seem determined to squander." "Ease? Standing? At what price?" Vivienne countered, her gaze unwavering. "My autonomy. My very being? I refuse to be a showpiece, a vessel for heirs. I am worth more." Her mother sighed, a sound of weary surrender. "You're being theatrical, Vivienne. All marriages are compromises, to some extent. Love is a luxury, not a necessity." "Then I forego luxury," Vivienne declared, her voice ringing with newfound resolve. "I choose liberty." The argument raged for hours, a relentless barrage of accusations and pleas. But Vivienne remained unyielding. She would not submit. She would not be silenced. Vivienne blinked, the recollection still sharp. Rebellion still smouldering. He was older. Cruel. He saw me as nothing but an asset. Colt remained silent, his gaze fixed on the distant, undulating hills. Another memory surfaced. Vivienne stood in her lavish chambers, imprisoned by silks and jewels, suffocated by perfume. Beyond the walls, the city throbbed with relentless energy, a constant reminder of her gilded confinement. Her gaze landed on the elaborate wedding gown displayed on the bed, a frothy confection of lace and pearls. A wave of nausea seized her. "I can't," she whispered, her voice lost in the pounding of her pulse. Her eyes found a small, worn valise tucked away in a corner, containing simple clothes and her meager savings, a beacon of hope, a promise of reprieve. With trembling fingers, she seized the bag and slipped into the night, abandoning the prescribed path, embracing the unknown with a blend of trepidation and exhilaration. "So, I fled," she concluded, her voice toneless. "I ran until my funds dwindled, my mount faltered, and I found myself here." Colt finally turned, his eyes reflecting surprise mingled with an emotion she couldn't quite decipher. "You bolted from a duke?" Vivienne managed a wan smile. He wasn't a particularly charming duke. A fleeting hint of amusement touched Colt's lips. "I imagine not." He hesitated, his gaze softening. "You know, running doesn't fix anything. It just delays the reckoning." "Perhaps," Vivienne conceded, "but sometimes delaying the reckoning is the only way to survive." The ensuing quiet felt heavier, thick with unvoiced truths and shared burdens. The moon had ascended, painting long, argent shadows across the yard. Colt cleared his throat, disrupting the moment. "My wife, her name was Sarah. And our little girl was Lily." He paused, his voice catching on unshed tears. "They fell ill. A fever claimed them both in a week. I was helpless." He averted his gaze, unable to meet her eyes. Vivienne reached out, her hand covering his. His skin felt rough, weathered, but beneath the coarseness, she felt a tremor of grief. "I'm so sorry, Colt," she repeated, the words finally resonating with heartfelt empathy. He didn't recoil. He remained silent. He simply sat there, his hand captured beneath hers, two wounded souls seeking comfort in the enveloping darkness, connected by the spectres of their past and the fragile promise of a future yet to unfold. The breeze quickened, whispering through the cottonwoods, carrying the scent of approaching rain and the glimmer of the new dawn. Finding her gripped the dawn, a blaze of colour across the eastern sky, nudged Vivienne awake. Yesterday's admissions weighed on her spirit, present but not crushing. An odd buoyancy had sprung up beside it, a tender sprout nourished by shared grief. She dressed in the plain work clothes provided, a stark contrast to the shimmering gowns of her former life. The small garden beckoned. Wrested from the stubborn earth, it offered life's simple rewards. Kneeling, she pressed her fingers into the cool dirt, carefully clearing space around tiny shoots. The scent of damp soil and nascent growth filled her, a soothing balm against memories of perfumed parties and suffocating expectations. Later, Colt discovered her there, humming softly, her brow creased in concentration. He leaned against the weathered fence, observing silently. The garden flourished, more than in seasons past. He hadn't realized its neglect, lost as he was in the daily fight for survival. "Got a talent for that," he observed finally, his tone gruff yet gentle. Vivienne started, pushing the stray lock from her face. "It's calming," she confessed, a delicate blush touching her cheeks. "And I enjoy watching things thrive. Anything will, given the right conditions," Colt replied, pushing away from the fence. "Even hope, I reckon." He flickered a glance her way, his expression unreadable. "Speaking of thriving, time you learned more than just weeding. Promised you'd earn your keep." He led her to the corral, where a chestnut mare waited patiently. Vivienne regarded the animal with mingled trepidation and excitement. Her previous riding experience had been limited to docile ponies, led by stable hands. This was different. "This is Belle," Colt said, stroking the mare's soft nose. "Gentle soul, but not stupid. Treat her with respect, she'll look after you." He demonstrated the saddling and bridling process, his movements efficient and precise. Vivienne watched, absorbing each step, mimicking his actions as she tightened the straps. He cupped her foot into the stirrup, and with a rush, she swung herself onto Belle's broad back. The world tilted. The ground seemed distant, and she could feel the mare's barely contained power. Vivienne clutched the reins, her knuckles bone white. Colt stood alongside, his gaze unwavering. "Easy," he murmured, his voice a deep resonance. "Just breathe, feel her." He devoted the next hour to her tutelage, patiently instructing her in the fundamentals of horsemanship, the hold of the reins, the use of her own weight for control, communicating through the subtlest cues. At first, Vivienne was clumsy, her movements awkward. But with each minute, her confidence grew, her body easing into the horse's rhythm. Belle responded, her gait smoothing as Vivienne found her center. The sun blazed overhead, an insistent weight. Sweat beaded on Vivienne's forehead, and her muscles protested. Yet she persisted. She was determined to master this skill, to prove her worth to Colt and to herself that she was more than just a pampered relic. At last, Colt called a halt. "All right, enough for today," he stated, a hint of admiration in his voice. "You learn quick." Vivienne slid from Belle's back, her legs shaky. She felt drained, yet elated. She had faced her fear, pushed her boundaries, and emerged victorious. "Thank you," she gasped, her voice breathless. I liked that." Colt nodded, his gaze lingering on her flushed features. "You got grit, Vivienne," he said, the compliment rare and precious. "More than I figured." The following days settled into a pattern of diligent work and quiet camaraderie. Vivienne continued to nurture the garden, coaxing life from the dry earth. Milking the cow, gathering eggs, even assisting Colt with lighter chores became part of her routine. She embraced the physicality, finding satisfaction in the concrete results of her labor. The calluses on her hands were a mark of pride, a testament to her newfound strength. Colt observed her, his initial reservations slowly dissipating. He witnessed her resolve, her eagerness to learn, her quiet fortitude. He saw a woman who had cast off her gilded constraints and met life's hard realities with a surprising bravery. He sought her company, drawn to her calm presence and her enduring optimism. Often, he found her in the garden, hands dirtied, a contented smile gracing her lips. He would sit with her, sharing comfortable silence, the unspoken connection between them deepening with each passing day. One evening, as the sun bled across the horizon in shades of fire and rose, Colt discovered Vivienne on the porch, watching the spectacle. He joined her, the wooden planks groaning faintly. "You've changed this place," he remarked, his voice hushed. "For the better." Vivienne turned to him, her eyes luminous in the fading light. "It's changed me too, Colt," she whispered. "I feel useful here, like I finally have a purpose." He reached out, his rough hand covering hers. Her skin was coarse, yet her touch was gentle and warm. "You always had one, Vivienne," he said, his gaze searching hers. "You just had to find it." The silence hung between them, laden with unspoken emotions. An undeniable tension crackled in the air, a feeling of anticipation, Then, a distant rumble shattered the moment. Colt stood, his eyes scanning the horizon. "Storm's coming," he said, his voice clipped. "We need to get the horses in." The spell was broken, but the feeling lingered, a promise hanging in the air. Vivienne rose, her heart hammering in her chest. The storm approached, both outside and within. And she knew, with a certainty that resonated deep in her soul, that everything was about to transform. A dance under the stars, the Harmony Creek Community Hall pulsed with vibrant life. Strands of festive lights draped beneath the rafters splashed the room in a honeyed ambience, illuminating a sea of faces flushed with delight. Laughter mingled with the lilting strains of a fiddle, creating a joyful cacophony. Vivienne, clad in a sky-blue dress of unpretentious cotton, felt a tremor of unease stir within her. It had been an age, or so it seemed, since she'd last braved a social gathering. Beside her stood Colt, stilted and a lattes in his crispest denim shirt and gleaming boots. He'd resisted this outing, but Maria Rodriguez, with her profound gaze, had been unyielding. "It's good for you, Colt," she'd declared, her dark eyes reflecting her deep concern. "You need to remember joy exists beyond the ranch's struggles." Then, turning her perceptive gaze towards Vivienne, she added, "And Vivienne needs connections. She can't remain cloistered on that hill forever." And so, they found themselves tethered near the refreshment table, observing. Couples spin and twirl. Colt broke the quiet. "Dance?" he offered, the query tinged with an almost defiant edge. Vivienne regarded him, surprised by the invitation. I'm not sure I recall the steps." A fleeting smile graced his lips. "Like riding. A little wobbly at first, but it comes back quick enough." He extended a hand. With a touch of trepidation, she met his. His palm, rough-hewn yet surprisingly gentle, enveloped hers. As they ventured onto the floor, a tide of self-consciousness threatened to engulf Vivienne. Eyes tracked their progress. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. The whispers were clear. The newcomer and the broken man. An unlikely match, no doubt. She could detect Colt's rigid posture next to her. "Pay them no mind," he muttered, his breath stirring her hair. "They'll soon find a new spectacle." He guided her into a simple two-step, and gradually, Vivienne's anxiety began to ebb. Colt proved an adept dancer, his movements measured and confident. She concentrated on mirroring his lead, on the rhythm that enveloped them, on the comforting pressure of his hand. A warmth radiated from his touch, dispelling the autumnal chill. After a few songs, Colt steered her toward the exit. "Need some air," he stated, his gaze averted. Outside, the night air was crisp and invigorating. Overhead, the inky canvas of the sky glittered with countless stars. The scent of burning wood and damp earth hung in the air. "It's magnificent," Vivienne murmured, craning her neck to admire the celestial tapestry. "Yeah," Colt concurred, his voice a low rumble. He leaned against a weathered post, observing her. Silence stretched, pregnant with unspoken thoughts. Vivienne felt his scrutiny, probing and inquisitive. She met his gaze, and for a suspended moment, the world seemed to pause. A knot of chattering women strolled past, their voices hushed with speculation. Vivienne caught fragments. "Expensive attire. Doesn't belong. Mark my words, she'll be gone soon." Colt's jaw hardened. "Ignore them," he reiterated, his tone sharper now. "It's all right," Vivienne responded quietly. "I'm growing accustomed to it." He pushed away from the post, closing the distance between them. "You shouldn't have to." He reached out, his fingertips tracing the curve of her cheek. The delicate caress sent a shiver through her. "Vivienne," he began, his voice thick with suppressed emotion. "Why did you really come?" The question hung, heavy with the weight of shared feelings. Vivienne hesitated, searching for the right words. How to explain the inner turmoil that had propelled her, the longing for authentic connection? I needed to escape," she admitted finally, her voice barely audible. "I needed to rediscover myself. And have you?" She met his intense gaze, her heart pounding. "I think I'm starting to." He searched her eyes, as if seeking truth within her soul. What about him? The reference was clear. Her former fiancé, the life she had abandoned. A life that was not her own. "He is the past," she asserted firmly. This is my future." Colt's expression softened. He lowered his head, his forehead nearly touching hers. "Don't make promises you can't keep, Vivienne." "I'm not," she whispered. He closed the remaining space, his lips finding hers in a tentative exploration. The kiss was light, cautious, yet it sparked a current through her. A kiss laden with unspoken yearning, nascent hope, the potential for something profound. The approach of voices shattered the fragile moment. They sprang apart, their breaths coming quickly. Maria Rodriguez materialized, her eyes sparkling mischievously in the lamplight. "There you are," she announced, her voice laced with amusement. "I was wondering where you'd vanished to. The music's starting up again. Colt, are you going to allow this lovely lady to miss the remainder of the evening?" Colt looked to Vivienne, a silent question in his eyes. She nodded, offering a shy smile. He took her hand, and they moved together back towards the hall, back towards the music's embrace, back towards the uncertain promise of what lay ahead. As they returned, Vivienne briefly turned back to the star-speckled sky, and for the first time in what felt like forever, a fragile hope bloomed within her. Perhaps, just perhaps, she had finally found belonging. Perhaps she had found her way home. Telegram from Trouble the following Tuesday, Maria hurried into the ranch house, her usual bright disposition shadowed by a knot of worry. Sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating floating dust specks as she approached Vivienne, clutching 2 yellow envelopes. "These arrived for you, Vivienne, at the telegraph office." Maria's voice was subdued as she extended the telegrams. They felt important. Vivienne's pulse quickened. Telegrams spelled urgency, often of the unwelcome kind. Her hands trembled as she took the envelopes, the stiff paper and incongruous texture against her work-worn fingers, a sharp reminder of the refined existence she had abandoned. "Thank you, Maria," she managed, her voice a mere breath. Maria lingered, a concerned crease etching her brow, before murmuring a hasty "of course, dear," and retreating towards the comforting clatter of the kitchen. Vivienne slumped onto a nearby stool, the smooth wood cool beneath her. She hesitated, eyes fixed on the stark rectangles, postponing the inevitable intrusion of the past. The sender on the first was a stranger, a Philadelphia law firm. She tore it open, a sudden dryness coating her mouth. The message was clipped and impersonal. "Regarding Miss Vivienne Prescott, immediate confirmation of your whereabouts and well-being required. Urgent legal matter necessitates your attention." A cold dread coiled in her stomach. Legal matter? What machinations was Arthur conjuring now? Crushing the paper in her fist, a wave of nausea threatened to overwhelm her. With a steadying breath, she reached for the second envelope. The handwriting was achingly familiar, that elegant, sloping script. Arthur. She paused, her fingers tracing the familiar strokes. A fleeting image flashed through her mind. Arthur, meticulously composing thank you notes after a grand soiree, his brow furrowed in concentration. A relic of a bygone era. With a resolute rip, she opened the second telegram. The words blurred before sharpening into focus. Vivienne, dearest, please return. All is forgiven. I long for you terribly. Arthur. A surge of white-hot anger consumed her. Forgiven? As if she were the transgressor. As if her aspirations, her passions, her very identity were mere trinkets to be casually disregarded. And then, with a flourish, forgiven. She reread the message, each word a barbed insult. Dearest? He'd never used such an endearment. It had always been Vivienne detached and formal, treating her like a treasured possession, not a breathing soul. She rose abruptly, the stool screeching against the wooden floor. She craved fresh air, a refuge from the suffocating weight of her former life. Outside, the boundless Montana sky offered a meagre balm. The wind surged through the prairie grass, carrying the sharp, clean scent of sage and sun-baked earth. She made her way to the corral, her gaze fixed on the distant horizon. Colt was there, repairing a broken section of the fence. The steady, rhythmic clang of his hammer against metal offered a grounding sense of normalcy. He stopped as she approached, his expression unreadable in the afternoon sun. "Everything all right, Vivienne?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. She shook her head, words failing her. She extended the telegrams, her hand trembling. Colt took them, his brow furrowing deeper with each line. He scanned the terse words, his jaw tightening. "Arthur?" he asked, his voice edged with steel. She nodded, tears pricking her eyes. "He wants me to go back." Colt remained silent, his quietude more profound than any possible utterance. He returned the telegrams, his calloused fingers briefly connecting with hers. "What do you want, Vivienne?" he asked, his gaze holding hers. The question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken possibilities. What did she want? Her existence had been orchestrated by others, her parents Arthur, the rigid dictates of society. Now, for the first time, she possessed agency. She looked at Colt, his weathered features softened by concern. She saw in his eyes a reflection of her own battles, her own longings. She saw a man tempered by hardship, yet retaining his intrinsic honesty, his innate kindness. "I don't want to go back," she said, her voice gaining strength despite the tremor in her hands. "I want to stay here, with you." The final words were almost lost, a quiet admission carried away on the breeze. Colt's expression gentled, a spark of something akin to hope flaring in his gaze. He reached out, gently brushing a stray lock of hair from her cheek. "Then stay," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Stay, and we'll navigate this together." A wave of relief, so profound it threatened to buckle her knees, washed over her. She leaned into his touch, drawing solace from his presence. Yet, even as she savoured the moment, a persistent unease lingered. Arthur was not a man to accept defeat lightly. He wouldn't simply accept her rejection and fade away. She knew, with a chilling certainty, that this was merely the opening skirmish. Colt seemed to sense her underlying worry. He enfolded her in his arms, holding her close. "We'll face it together," he murmured, his voice a low vibration against her ear. "Whatever comes our way." The sun began its descent, painting the sky in hues of fiery orange and deep violet. The air grew cooler, carrying the subtle scent of approaching night. As Vivienne stood encircled in Colt's embrace, She understood that her life had undergone an irreversible transformation. She had discovered a sanctuary, a purpose, a love that had once seemed unattainable. But she was also acutely aware that her past was not yet done with her. It was a shadow lurking just beyond the light, ever encroaching, threatening to swallow her whole. The battle for her liberation, for her future, had only just commenced. The dust bowls fury the wind, a nagging murmur against the floorboards since dawn, had escalated into a banshee wail by noon, rattling the very bones of the ranch house. Vivienne, pinning laundry to the line, narrowed her eyes at the horizon. The familiar azure had morphed into a jaundiced hue, a contusion blooming across the firmament. "Colt!" she called, her voice a useless scrap thrown to the gale. Abandoning the flapping sheets, she sprinted toward the barn, her skirt snapping like a flag. Colt emerged from the dim interior, his expression a landscape of worry. He'd witnessed this spectacle too often. Inside Vivienne, now. "What is it?" she pressed, anxiety tightening her throat. He simply gestured towards the advancing horizon. The sickly yellow had deepened, morphing into a monstrous stain that devoured the vista. "Sandstorm," he rasped, his voice struggling against the growing tempest. "A behemoth?" Vivienne remained rooted, a statue carved from dread. She knew the tales, hushed accounts from townspeople about the Dust Bowl, of obliterated farms and shattered lives. But witnessing this Leviathan's approach, feeling its oppressive weight, was a visceral terror. "We have to do something," she managed, her voice a tremor. A flicker, perhaps respect, ignited Colt's habitually guarded gaze. "Damn right we do. The barn first. Reinforce it. Then the livestock." He seized her arm, urging her onward. The gale intensified. Whipping strands of hair across her face, each lash a stinging kiss of grit. The air thickened, infused with the sharp tang of metal. Inside the barn, the animals were a chorus of unrest, eyes wide with primordial dread. The horses shrieked, their hooves a frantic tattoo against the wooden floor. The cattle bellowed their despair. "Help with these latches," Colt roared, indicating the heavy doors. "We've got to secure them." Vivienne, her movements hampered by panic, grappled with the cold metal. The wind hammered the barn, threatening to tear it from its foundations. Dust infiltrated every crevice, leaving a film of grime on everything. "Faster!" Colt urged, wrestling with the final latch. A heavy chain and padlock secured it. Now, the animals. They moved as a practiced unit. Colt guided the horses into their stalls, murmuring reassurances as he stroked their trembling flanks. Vivienne shepherded the cows into the sheltered rear, offering water and handfuls of hay. "We need to mask their faces," Colt instructed, ripping strips of burlap. "Shield their lungs." Vivienne nodded, understanding flashing in her eyes. Taking a strip, she approached a cafe, its eyes pools of liquid fear. Soft words accompanied gentle strokes as she tied the burlap around its muzzle. "Easy, girl," she soothed. "You'll be all right." The calf eased slightly, nudging her hand. A surge of protective ferocity coursed through Vivienne, a resolve to safeguard these creatures. The storm unleashed its full wrath. The world vanished in a cyclone of ochre. The barn groaned under the assault of the unrelenting wind. Breathing became a chore. The air thick with dust. Colt hauled Vivienne close, a human shield. "Down," he bellowed, his voice a muffled roar. "Stay low." They huddled on the barn floor, the animals their only comfort. For hours, the tempest raged, a brutal assault on their senses. Dust permeated everything, a gritty second skin. Vivienne coughed, her throat burning. She peered up at Colt, his face a study in worry. His grip on her hand was a lifeline, firm, reassuring. "We'll ride it out," he promised, his voice rough. "We always do." She believed him. There, in the dust-choked gloom, she knew they could endure anything together. As the hours crawled by, the storm slowly relinquished its grip. The wind softened, the dust began its descent. The jaundiced sky began to brighten, revealing a landscape utterly transformed. They emerged from the barn, cautiously, blinking against the returning light. The ranch was unrecognizable, entombed in a thick layer of dust, the trees and fences mere ghosts. The air, still heavy with grit, was at least breathable. Vivienne gasped, covering her mouth with a trembling hand. The desolation was staggering. Colt's arm went around her shoulders, a grounding weight. "It's bad," he admitted, his voice drained. "But it could have been far worse." They surveyed the damage, planning their next move. Fences lay shattered, fields vanished beneath a sea of dust. The well was choked, the water sullied. "Well first," Colt said, his gaze hardening. "Then the fences." Vivienne nodded, her heart leaden. The task ahead was monumental. But they would face it, together. They labored without pause throughout the day, clearing the well, mending the fences, tending to the animals. The dust clung to them, a constant, gritty reminder of the storm's ferocity. Yet they pressed on. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the dust-covered land in shades of orange and purple, they finally rested, spent but resolute. They had made a beginning. They had survived. Vivienne looked at Colt, his face scored with dirt and exhaustion. In his gaze, usually so carefully guarded, she saw weary gratitude. "Thank you," she choked out, her voice thick. "For everything." He nodded, his gaze lingering on her face. "We're in this together, Vivienne. Always." His calloused fingers intertwined with hers, a simple gesture that spoke volumes. They were bound, not only by the land, but by shared resilience, by a burgeoning love blooming in the most unforgiving soil. That night, as they sat on the porch, watching the stars prick the clear velvet sky, Vivienne felt a fragile peace bloom within her. The storm had tested them, pushed them to the brink, but it had also forged a bond stronger than any tempest. The telegrams lingered at the edge of her thoughts, a shadow from her past. But for now, bathed in the starlight of the Montana night, she could momentarily forget Arthur, the life she had abandoned. She was here, with Colt, building something new from the wreckage, and she wouldn't relinquish it for anything. Hidden talents the storm's aftermath clung to the air like a shroud. Dust devils still danced across the ravaged fields, mocking their efforts. Days blurred into a relentless cycle of repair-mending fences, tending to injured livestock, and salvaging what they could from the debris. Vivienne's hands, once accustomed to embroidery needles, were now calloused and scarred, her fingernails perpetually stained with dirt. Yet, she worked with a grim determination, finding a strange solace in the physical labor. One afternoon, seeking respite from the sun's brutal glare, she ventured into the barn. The air inside was thick with the scent of hay and horses, a welcome change from the dust-laden air outside. While searching for a coil of rope, she noticed a stack of roughly hewn wooden planks tucked away in a corner, partially concealed by a discarded tarp. Curiosity piqued, she pulled back the tarp. Beneath lay not just planks of wood, but a collection of intricately carved figures. A soaring eagle, its wings spread in majestic flight. A grazing deer, its delicate antlers captured with remarkable detail. A coiled rattlesnake, its scales rendered with unsettling realism. Each piece was imbued with a raw, untamed beauty that belied its humble material. Vivienne gasped, her fingers tracing the smooth curve of the eagle's wing. These were not the work of a simple rancher. They were the creations of an artist. She knew immediately who was responsible. Colt. She found him later, mending a section of fence near the north pasture. The setting sun cast long shadows across the land, painting the scene in hues of orange and gold. He worked with a focused intensity, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Colt," she said softly. Approaching him, he looked up, his expression guarded. "Something wrong?" I found something in the barn," she replied, her voice hesitant. His eyes narrowed. "Found what?" "The carvings," she clarified, watching his reaction. His face hardened, the lines around his eyes deepening. He dropped the hammer he was holding, the sound echoing in the stillness of the evening. "Those are nothing, just scraps of wood." "They're beautiful," Vivienne insisted, stepping closer. "You're incredibly talented." He turned away, avoiding her gaze. "Don't what?" "Don't admire your work. Don't acknowledge your skill," she challenged, her voice rising slightly. "Why are you so ashamed of them?" He remained silent for a long moment, his back to her. The only sound was the wind whispering through the tall grass. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and rough. "It's a waste of time. Time I should be spending on things that matter, things that keep this ranch afloat. But it's more than just a waste of time, isn't it?" Vivienne pressed, sensing a deeper reason for his reluctance. "It's something personal." He turned back to her, his eyes filled with a pain she couldn't quite decipher. "My mother, she used to carve. Small trinkets mostly. Little animals for me when I was a boy." He paused, his voice catching. "She died when I was 10. Consumption." Vivienne's heart ached for him. She understood now. The carvings were a connection to his past, to a love he had lost. A reminder of a happier time, perhaps too painful to fully embrace. After she was gone, he continued, his voice barely a whisper. "My father. He burned all her carvings. Said they were useless. Sentimental nonsense." "Oh, Colt," Vivienne breathed, reaching out to touch his arm. He flinched slightly, but didn't pull away. "He wanted me to be a man, a rancher, nothing else." He spat the last word out as if it tasted like ash. "And you carved anyway," Vivienne said softly, her eyes meeting his. He shrugged, a flicker of defiance in his gaze. "Sometimes. When I can't sleep. When the silence gets too loud." "Show me," she urged. "Show me how you do it." He hesitated, then sighed. "All right," he relented, picking up a piece of wood and a carving knife. "But don't expect much." He sat on a fallen log and began to work, his movements surprisingly delicate and precise. Vivienne watched, mesmerized, as he coaxed a form out of the wood. A small bird, perched on a branch. "Where did you learn?" she asked quietly. "Mostly taught myself," he replied, his eyes focused on the task at hand. "Watched my mother. Read some books." "It's incredible," Vivienne said sincerely. "You have a gift, Colt. You shouldn't hide it." He scoffed. "A gift? What good is a gift when the bank is threatening to foreclose on the ranch? It's good for your soul," Vivienne countered. "It's something that brings you joy. Something that reminds you of your mother." He stopped carving, his hand stilling. He looked at the small bird in his hand, then back at Vivienne. "Maybe," he conceded, his voice softer now. "Maybe you could sell them," Vivienne suggested, her mind racing with possibilities. "At the market in town. People would buy them, and sure of it." He shook his head. "Too much work. I don't have the time. I could help, Vivienne offered. I could take them to market, handle the sales. He looked at her, a mixture of surprise and suspicion in his eyes. Why would you do that? Because I believe in your talent, she said simply. And because I want to help you save this ranch. He stared at her for a long moment, searching her face. Finally, a faint smile touched his lips. All right, Vivienne, he said, his voice laced with a newfound warmth. Let's see what we can do. As the last rays of sunlight faded from the sky, Vivienne knew that something had shifted between them. A wall had come down, a vulnerability revealed. She had glimpsed a hidden part of Colt, a gentler, more sensitive side that he usually kept carefully concealed. And in that moment, her affection for him deepened, blossoming into something more profound. The carvings were more than just pieces of wood. They were a symbol of hope, a testament to the power of art and love to heal even the deepest wounds. The suitor arrived, the stagecoach ground to a halt before the general store, kicking up a swirling cloud of terracotta dust that briefly eclipsed the afternoon sun. Passengers spilled out, their joints protesting the arduous journey. Among the road-weary figures, one man presented a stark contrast. Despite the wrinkles of travel, his impeccably tailored suit whispered of a life oceans away from redemption's rough-hewn existence. Arthur Sterling, his jaw set with grim resolve, surveyed the alien landscape with ill-disguised distaste. He adjusted his cravat, the silk suddenly constricting in the arid climate. He had come a long way, propelled by a singular, driving force, Vivienne. The mere thought of her, flitting about in this forsaken territory, grated against his innate need for order and dominion. She was a Prescott. Prescotts didn't simply vanish. A cheerful jingle announced Arthur's entry into the general store. The mingled scents of smoked meats, worked leather, and a delicate floral note, perhaps lavender, assaulted his senses. He wrinkled his nose, the aroma a far cry from the cultivated perfumes of his London drawing room. There, at the counter, her back turned, stood Vivienne. She meticulously counted out coins for Mrs. Henderson, purchasing a sack of flour. A plain gingham dress, faded with use, cloaked her form, and her usually elaborate coiffure was restrained in a simple braid. Arthur's breath snagged in his chest. She appeared transformed. More untamed, perhaps, yet undeniably captivating. He advanced, his polished dress shoes rapping sharply against the plank floor. Vivienne? The sound of his voice sliced through the store's gentle murmur. Vivienne went rigid. A tremor skittered down her spine, an unwelcome reminder of the life she'd striven to outrun. Slowly, she pivoted, her eyes widening in disbelief as they met Arthur's cold, calculating stare. The air in the establishment seemed to congeal, the normal sounds of commerce receding to a distant drone. Sensing the sudden spike in tension, Mrs. Henderson discreetly vanished into the store's depths, leaving Vivienne and Arthur to grapple with their history. "Arthur," Vivienne breathed, her voice barely audible. "What brings you here?" A condescending smile tugged at his lips. "Darling, did you honestly believe I would allow you to simply disappear? You are a Prescott, Vivienne, entrusted with certain obligations." He indicated the store with a dismissive sweep of his hand, his expression radiating utter disdain for his surroundings. "This is hardly a suitable environment for you." Vivienne drew herself up straighter, her fingers instinctively tightening around the flour sack. "This is my life now, Arthur." "A life?" he scoffed derisively. "Existing in some dusty backwater, pretending to be a frontier woman. Don't be preposterous, Vivienne. You are destined for so much more. Society craves your presence, Your family longs for you. I long for you." The final sentiment lingered in the air, waited with unspoken expectations. Vivienne met his gaze without flinching. "I don't miss them, Arthur. I don't miss any of it." "You're acting rashly, Vivienne. You're distraught. Perhaps this Morrison has beguiled you with his rustic charm." His eyes narrowed imperceptibly, a flicker of possessive ire igniting within their depths. "But this fleeting fancy will pass. Return home, Vivienne. Return to where you belong." "Colt has nothing to do with this," Vivienne countered, her voice gaining strength with each word. "This isn't a passing fancy, Arthur. This is my decision. I am staying here." Arthur closed the distance between them, invading her personal space. His voice dropped to a hushed, coaxing tone. "Consider your family, Vivienne. Consider the scandal you're creating. This is not your true self. You are a Prescott. Your destiny lies in a world of elegance, of influence. Your destiny is to be my wife." The word wife landed like a brand, scorching her very being. She recoiled instinctively, taking a step back. "I am not destined for anything I don't choose, Arthur. And I choose this. I choose to remain here. I choose to forge my own path, on my own terms." Arthur's smile evaporated, replaced by a rigid mask of barely suppressed fury. "You're being utterly unreasonable, Vivienne. You're sacrificing everything of value, but I won't permit it. I came here to reclaim you, and I intend to succeed." He reached for her hand, his grasp firm and demanding. Vivienne flinched, wrenching her hand free. "Don't touch me." The sound of approaching footsteps intruded upon the fraught standoff. Colt strode into the general store, his eyes instantly homing in on Vivienne and the stranger who held her captive. He didn't need explanations. The palpable tension spoke volumes, a storm gathering within the confines of the small space. His gaze looked onto Arthur's, his expression hardening into granite. "Is there a problem here?" he inquired, his voice a low, simmering threat. Arthur released Vivienne's hand, turning to face Colt with a dismissive sneer. "This is a domestic matter between Miss Prescott and myself. I suggest you concern yourself with your own affairs." Colt advanced another step, his sheer presence dominating the space. "Miss Prescott is my affair." Vivienne looked from Colt to Arthur, her heart hammering against her ribs. Two disparate worlds collided, and she stood squarely in the crossfire. The past she had fought so hard to bury had at last caught up with her, threatening to obliterate the delicate tendrils of happiness she had cultivated in redemption. A line in the sand, the Redemption Saloon's batwings crashed open, the sound echoing like a judge's gavel. Colt filled the entrance, a silhouette carved by the sinking sun, the harsh light deepening the etchings on his weathered face. The piano's ragtime faltered, each note bleeding into silence as every head swiveled. Near the rear, Arthur Sterling sat nursing a tumbler of amber liquid, unmoved. A glacial incline of his head was his only acknowledgement, a gesture thick with disdain. "Morrison," he purred, his voice a silken thread against the saloon's coarse fabric. Colt moved forward, boots muffled by the sawdust. He halted at Arthur's table, radiating a tangible menace. "Sterling," he rumbled, his tone a low growl. "We need to talk." A dry chuckle rattled from Arthur's throat, devoid of warmth. "I thought we had. My designs on this Prescott were, I believed, perfectly articulated." "Your designs are worthless here," Colt stated, jaw clenched tight. Vivienne decides her own fate. Does she truly? A glint sparked in Arthur's eyes, hinting at something far from pleasant. Or is she simply confused by the sheer simplicity of this existence? He gestured dismissively at their surroundings. "She's found more joy here than she ever knew back east," Colt countered, his voice sharpening. "She's discovered something authentic, something beyond your comprehension, or authentic. Arthur scoffed, the word laced with disbelief. A failing ranch, a life of drudgery, that's your definition of authentic. I offer her security, opulence, a place amongst the elite. What can you offer beyond calloused hands and sun-baked earth? I offer her respect, Colt said, his gaze unwavering and sharp, the chance to be herself, unshackled by finery and expectations. A life where her voice matters, where her efforts are valued. Arthur leaned back, scrutinizing Colt with predatory intent. You've grown rather fond of her, haven't you, Morrison? Is it a novelty of a refined woman on your arm? Or something bordering on sentimentality? Colt's fists tightened, knuckles gleaming bone-white. That's my affair. Vivienne's affair is my affair, Arthur declared, steel creeping back into his voice. She is promised to me. She has duties. Duties she abandoned, Colt shot back. And I plan to ensure she stays quit of them. You presume much, Morrison, Arthur hissed, a vein throbbing in his temple as his composure cracked. Do you believe you can truly obstruct my desires? I'm standing here, Colt countered, his gaze locked on Arthur's. And I'm telling you to leave her be. Return to your elaborate parties and your gilded cages. Vivienne doesn't belong within those walls. Arthur slowly rose, fury blazing in his eyes. This is far from concluded, Morrison. Not by any means. Vivienne, a statue carved from shadow, remained pressed against a building wall just outside. Drawn by a potent cocktail of concern and curiosity after spotting Colt's dramatic entrance, she'd followed. Now, she was trapped, an accidental voyeur to a confrontation that sent tremors down her spine. She witnessed the taut lines of Colt's suppressed wrath, the entitled arrogance radiating from Arthur. She yearned to rush in, to stand shoulder to shoulder with Colt, to spit defiance into Arthur's face, yet a paralyzing fear held her fast, the dread that her involvement would only fan the flames. Are you issuing a threat, Sterling? Colt's voice vibrated with barely contained power. Merely an observation, Arthur purred, each word a drop of venom. You are a simple dirt farmer, Morrison. You are hopelessly outmatched by my assets, my connections. I will reclaim Vivienne, one way or another. Colt closed the space separating them, his presence an undeniable challenge. Lay a hand on her, even look at her the wrong way, and you will answer to me. And I promise you, Sterling, that is an experience you will most certainly regret. The very air seemed to crackle, poised for combustion. The saloon's silence screamed. Every eye was a fixed point, anticipating the inevitable clash. Arthur hesitated, his gaze darting from Colt's resolute face to his capable hands, calculating the physical risk. He was accustomed to bending the world to his will with wealth. Influence, not brute force. Finally, he shattered the silence with a humorless, brittle laugh. Very well. Morrison, I see your passions are thoroughly engaged. I shall leave you to wallow in your illusions, but do not for a moment believe I have surrendered. I simply prefer to deploy my resources with more finesse. He retrieved his hat, a flick of his wrist dusting off imperceptible lint, and settled it on his head. A final, contemptuous glance at Colt, and he pivoted, his back a rigid line as he strode toward the exit. As he passed Vivienne's alcove, his gaze snagged on hers for a fleeting instant. A mere hint of the smile graced his lips, a promise of dark events to come. Then he vanished, swallowed by the twilight. Colt tracked his departure, his muscles coiled, his jaw a granite mask. Not until Arthur disappeared did he visibly unwind. Then he turned, his gaze sweeping the street. He located Vivienne, a pale figure trembling in the shadows. He moved toward her, his expression softening with concern. Vivienne, he murmured, his voice a reassuring balm. Are you all right? She nodded slowly, incapable of speech, captivated by the intensity she'd witnessed. She had never seen Colt ignite that way, so fiercely protective. It was a terrifying vision, and yet undeniably thrilling. He's not going to let this go, is he? She finally choked out, her voice barely audible. Colt grasped her hand, his grip firm and grounding. No, he said, his eyes blazing with unyielding resolve. Neither am I. The dust devils had settled, leaving a mirage quivering above the baked earth. Vivienne found Colt patching a busted fence, his actions spare and practiced. A lingering tension pulsed in the air, a silent reverberation from the saloon clash that raised goosebumps on her arms. Eavesdropping hadn't been her intent, yet the raw urgency in Colt's tone, a barely caged wrath, had glued her feet to the ground. She approached cautiously, boots whispering against the brittle grass. Colt? He didn't acknowledge her, intent on hammering a nail into the aged wood. Need something, Vivienne? His tone was carefully even, masking the tempest she'd sensed brewing within him earlier. She inhaled deeply, the scent of parched soil and sun-drenched timber filling her. I came to thank you. The hammer paused mid-swing. For what? For what you did at the saloon? For standing up for me. His gaze finally met hers, eyes the colour of a storm-ridden lake. You don't need me to fight your battles, Vivienne. You're stronger than you give yourself credit for. I know, she murmured, but it still mattered, knowing you would. She hesitated, words bottled up for weeks suddenly clamouring for release. Colt. He waited, expression an enigma. I care about you, Colt. More deeply than I ever imagined. I think I'm falling for you. The confession hung suspended, fragile and exposed. The hammer slipped, hitting the fence with a dull thud. He stared, disbelief etched on his face, alongside something akin to fear. He retrieved the tool, knuckles bone white around a coal. The handle. Vivienne, he began, voice gravelly. You don't understand. I do understand, she insisted, closing the space between them. I know this isn't the life I envisioned, but it's the life I want. With you. He turned away, resuming his task with renewed vigour. Don't say things you'll regret. Don't mistake gratitude for something it's not. It's not just gratitude, she countered, her voice gaining volume. It's so much bigger than that, Colt. Can't you feel it? He swung the hammer with force, the sound echoing in the stillness of the afternoon. Feel what, Vivienne? That you're a refined woman, accustomed to luxury, while I'm a busted-up rancher with nothing to offer you but hardship and dust. That's not true, she exclaimed, tears pricking her eyes. You have so much to offer. You're decent, you're resilient, you're everything I've ever secretly desired. He shook his head, jaw clenched tight. You deserve better, Vivienne. Better than me. I don't want better, she pleaded. I want you. He ceased hammering, his gaze finally meeting hers, filled with a pain that resonated with her own. Vivienne, I can't. Can't what? Can't bring yourself to love me back? He averted his eyes, unable to hold her gaze. I can't risk it. Risk what? She whispered. Risk losing you, he confessed, the words ripped from him. Everyone I've ever loved, they've been taken. I can't endure that again. I simply can't. The weight of his words crashed upon her. His trepidation wasn't about her inadequacies. It was his own baggage, the spectres that shadowed him. She reached to touch his arm, but he recoiled as if burned. Colt, she said gently, I'm not going anywhere. You will. he insisted, his voice tinged with desperate conviction. Your former life will beckon. Sterling will return. And when those things happen, you'll realize you're a fish out of water here. You'll realize you don't belong with me. That's not a fair assessment, she whispered, tears now streaming freely. You're rejecting me before I even have a chance to pack my bags. He remained mute, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. So that's your final answer? She asked, her voice trembling. You're just going to ignore this? Pretend that we don't have something unique? He offered no reply. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Vivienne felt her core fracture. She had bared her deepest self, offered him her affection, and he had rebuffed it, not out of spite, but from fear. And maybe, she realized with renewed heartache, from a profound conviction that he was unworthy. Turning away, she trudged toward the house, each step laden with sorrow. Every footfall emphasized the gulf that now yawned between them. The vibrant hope that had flowered within her over the past weeks shriveled, leaving a desolate expanse of disillusionment and bewilderment. Reaching the porch, she paused, glancing back at Colt. He remained by the fence, his silhouette etched against the setting sun, a solitary guardian of a wounded spirit. She longed to rush back, to plead with him, to make him understand that his fear blinded him to the possibility of joy. But she knew it was futile. He had made his choice. With a sigh, she entered the house, the door closing behind her with a muted, definitive click. Inside, the shadows deepened, mirroring the gloom that had settled within her. She was isolated, not just within those walls, but in her affection for a man too paralyzed by fear to reciprocate. Sleep eluded her that night. She threshed in bed, Colt's haunted eyes seared into her mind. She dissected their exchange repeatedly, seeking a different outcome, a changed reaction. But each time, she reached the same crushing conclusion. He believed he was undeserving of her. As dawn's pale light infiltrated the room, Vivienne reached a decision. She couldn't remain there, not in this state, not with the constant reminder of what might have been. She needed space, time for healing, time to reassess what she desired and what she was prepared to pursue. She rose, her movements slow and deliberate. She packed a small bag with necessities, her heart aching with each item included. She left a note for Colt on the kitchen table, a simple message conveying her deep sorrow and the hope that, one day, he might grasp her feelings. Then, she ventured into the nascent day, leaving behind the ranch, the man she loved, and a piece of herself she feared she might never recover. The boundless landscape of the American West stretched before her, offering both autonomy and uncertainty. She had no fixed destination, but she knew she could not stay where she was. She needed to chart her own course, even if it meant leaving Colt behind. The price of water the stagecoach lurched along the parched trail, its dust cloud a choking shroud for Vivienne. Her gloved hand tightened on her reticule, its time-worn leather a poignant reminder of the opulent silks she'd left behind. Inside, a single bank draft, all that remained of her former life, lay nestled among sparse belongings, a life she was resolved to shed. Harmony Creek had been her home for a fortnight, a silent observer, employed in mundane tasks at the mercantile. She watched Colt, studied the barren landscape, felt the town's quiet despair like grit in the air. The ranch's looming failure was plain to see, and she knew, with an unwavering conviction, that access to water was the linchpin. The Harmony Creek Land Registry and Legal Office was a humble affair, redolent with the scents of ink and aged parchment. Within, Mr. Abernathy, his spectacles perched precariously on his nose, listened intently as Vivienne presented her inquiry. She adopted the guise of Miss Eleanor Vance, projecting a calm assurance that masked her inner turmoil. "My understanding is that the water rights pertaining to the Morrisons' northern acreage are currently unencumbered," she stated, her voice barely audible above the scratch of Abernathy's quill. "Available, perhaps, Miss Vance, but certainly not inexpensive," he countered, his gaze sharp with appraisal. "Old Man Hemlock is aware of their worth, and has been waiting for the right moment, for desperation to sweeten the deal." Vivienne met his scrutiny head-on. "I am prepared to negotiate." The transaction was brisk, demanding, and left Vivienne feeling both victorious and strangely empty. She relinquished nearly all her funds, leaving a meagre sum for survival. But the deed, weighty and official, was now hers, a concrete emblem of her sacrifice. Back at the mercantile, she bartered for passage back toward the Morrison spread. The sinking sun splashed the horizon with fiery hues she barely registered. Her thoughts were consumed by Colt, by the shadows that haunted his eyes, the determined line of his jaw, the quiet resignation that seemed to burden his spirit. She couldn't stand to see him lose everything, not when she possessed the means to help. She slipped onto the ranch under the cloak of night, the deed safely concealed within her coat. Handing it over directly was impossible. He would reject it. Pride, obstinacy, whatever you called it was integral to his being, as ingrained as the lines on his weathered hands. She needed a way to ensure he accepted it, without revealing her involvement. The following dawn, Colt was already outside, repairing a fence battered by the relentless wind. Inside, Vivienne found Martha in the kitchen, humming a tuneless melody as she worked the dough. "Martha, I need your assistance," Vivienne began, her voice hushed. Martha looked up, concern etched on her brow. "What is it, child? You look like you haven't slept a wink." Vivienne recounted her actions, her voice wavering slightly as she laid bare her plan. Martha listened in silence, her expression inscrutable. "You acted according to your conscience," Martha said finally, her tone gentle. "But Colt is a proud man. This will be a challenge." Together, they hatched a scheme. Martha would stumble upon the deed while sorting through an old trunk in the attic, a trunk that had once belonged to Colt's father. It was a desperate gamble, but their only hope. That evening, as Colt sat at the kitchen table, cradling a mug of coffee, Martha made her announcement. "Colt, I unearthed something in the attic today," she began casually. "An old land patent, tucked away in your father's trunk. Apparently, he acquired the water rights to the northern section years ago, and just neglected to mention it." Colt's head shot up, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. "Water rights? To the northern section? That's Hemlock's territory." "Was Hemlock's territory," Martha corrected, placing the deed on the table. "It states here, purchased by your father, Jedediah Morrison, back in 78. Colt snatched up the deed, his brow furrowed in concentration as he scrutinized the document. Vivienne watched from the periphery, her pulse racing in her chest. This can't be correct," he muttered, running a calloused hand through his hair. "I would have known about this." "Perhaps your father simply omitted to inform you," Martha suggested with a dismissive shrug. "He was advancing in years after all." Colt remained transfixed by the deed, his face a canvas of disbelief and burgeoning hope. If this is authentic, if this is genuinely authentic. He rose abruptly, seized his hat, and strode out the door. Vivienne watched him depart, her stomach knotted with apprehension. Had she chosen correctly, or had she only compounded the situation? Hours later, Colt returned, his face a study in fatigue mingled with something else, a nuance Vivienne struggled to identify. He moved directly to the fireplace. staring fixedly into the dancing flames. "I spoke with Abernathy," he stated, his voice subdued. "He verified it. The deed is legitimate. My father secured the water rights years ago." He pivoted to face Vivienne, his gaze probing hers. But Abernathy also revealed something else. He said those rights were just sold, a week prior, to a woman identifying herself as Eleanor Vance. The room crackled with unspoken tension. Vivienne remained mute, her gaze locked with Colt's. He advanced a step, his voice barely a breath. "Eleanor Vance, your mother's given name and maiden name, aren't they?" Vivienne nodded slowly, her throat constricting with emotion. "Why, Vivienne?" he questioned, his voice laced with a tangle of anger and disbelief. "Why would he do this?" Tears welled in Vivienne's eyes. "Because I couldn't bear to witness you lose everything," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Because I care for you, Colt, more than you comprehend." Colt regarded her, his expression indecipherable. He ran a hand through his hair, his eyes tormented. "You shouldn't have done this," he said finally, his tone sharp. "You shouldn't have compromised yourself for me." "It wasn't a compromise," Vivienne protested, her voice rising. "It was a choice I made because I yearned to assist you, because I believe in you." Colt turned away, his back to her. "You don't comprehend," he said, his voice thick with feeling. "You don't comprehend the implications of your actions." He walked out of the house, leaving Vivienne standing alone in the flickering firelight, her heart fractured into countless pieces. She had attempted to rescue him, but in doing so, had only driven him further away. The cost of mortar, it appeared, was steeper than she could have foreseen. Standing tall dust devils danced around Arthur's immaculate boots, a blatant affront to the ranch's earthy reality. He loomed over Vivienne, a hunter's light burning in his gaze as he addressed her. "Running away was quaint, Vivienne, but this prolonged game ends now. Time to return." Vivienne stood firm, tendrils escaping her elaborate coiffure to whip around her resolute face. The Philadelphia wallflower had withered in her place, stood a woman tempered by struggle and newfound optimism. "This is my home, Arthur. I'm not going anywhere with you." A mirthless chuckle escaped Arthur's lips, drier than the desert air. "A misunderstanding. It isn't a request. Consider the repercussions, Vivienne. A runaway bride, eking out an existence with this." He waved a dismissive hand at Colt's weathered dwelling. "Your family's name will be mud." He closed the distance, his voice a sibilant threat. "Unless certain personal matters remain confidential." Vivienne's breath caught. Her past, the gilded cage she'd so desperately broken free of, could be weaponized. Colt, a silent observer until now, moved forward, his jaw a rigid line. "Leave my land, Sterling." The words vibrated with controlled fury, a promise of pain barely leashed. Arthur remained unmoved. "This has nothing to do with you, Morrison. This is about family obligations, reputation." He refocused on Vivienne. "Come home, Vivienne, before I'm compelled to unearth secrets best left buried." Vivienne glanced at Colt, seeing the worry etched into the lines around his eyes. And a wave of protectiveness engulfed her. She wouldn't let Arthur use her to harm him or this community. "I need a word," Colt said to Maria, his voice strained. He discovered her tending her garden. The riot of colour, a sharp contrast to the unease twisting in his gut. Maria looked up, her brow creased with concern. "What is it, Colt? You look like you've seen a phantom." "Sterling's here," he said, dispensing with pleasantries. "He's threatening Vivienne. Says he'll air her dirty laundry if she doesn't go back." Maria's eyes blazed. "That viper. He can't do that. He has money, Influence, Maria. He can make things ugly, not just for Vivienne, but for everyone. Colt raked a hand through his hair, frustration etched into every line of his body. I'm at a loss. Maria placed a reassuring hand on his arm. Then you do what you always do, Colt. You champion what's right. You gather your allies. Colt hesitated. Asking for help didn't come easy. But Maria was right. He couldn't shoulder this burden alone. He needed the backing of the townsfolk, the people who had embraced Vivienne as one of their own. He spent the following hour traversing the town, stopping at each homestead, each shop, each watering hole. He recounted Arthur's threats, laying bare what was at stake. He spoke of Vivienne's generosity, her diligence, her indomitable spirit. He reminded them of how she had salvaged the ranch, woven herself into the fabric of their lives. He thinks he can just ride in here and snatch her away, Colt declared to a group assembled before the general store, his voice gaining fervor. He believes his wealth grants him the right to bully us. But this is our home, our family. We won't allow it. A groundswell of affirmation rippled through the crowd, faces hardened, resolve solidifying. They wouldn't let a wealthy interloper jeopardize one of their own. As twilight descended, the townspeople coalesced in front of the sow saloon, their faces lit by the amber glow of lanterns. Colt stood at the vanguard, his gaze locked on Arthur, who stood beside Vivienne, an arrogant smirk plastered on his face. Sterling. Colt's voice cut through the gathering dusk, resonant and unwavering. You thought you could stroll in here and intimidate us. You believed your money could purchase Vivienne's return. You were mistaken. Arthur scoffed. These locals can't shield her from reality. They already have, Vivienne replied, stepping forward. Her voice wavered slightly, but her gaze blazed with defiance. They know me. They know who I am today, not who I was expected to be. She turned to the crowd, her gaze sweeping over the faces of her friends, her neighbors. I sought sanctuary here, fleeing a life of obligation, a life that wasn't mine. I discovered something I never imagined possible. A home, a purpose, and people who value me for who I am, not for what I possess. She inhaled deeply, her heart pounding against her ribs. This was the crux, the moment of truth. She had to commit, to declare her allegiance, to stand tall against the expectations that had haunted her for so long. Pivoting back to Arthur, she met his gaze squarely. I will not return with you. I reject your proposal, your threats, your entire existence. She paused, her voice gaining strength with each syllable. I am not the woman you left behind, Arthur. I am my own woman now. The crowd erupted in cheers, their voices echoing through the town. They were behind her. A wall of support. Vivienne looked towards Colt, her eyes brimming with love and gratitude. She knew she had wounded him, that her secrets had strained their fledgling connection, but in this instant, bolstered by the buy. Solidarity of the community. She glimpsed a flicker of hope that they could find their way back to each other. She stepped towards Colt, extending her hand. And I love him, she proclaimed, her voice ringing with certainty. I love Colt Morrison. Silence descended. All eyes focused on Colt, awaiting his reaction. He remained paralyzed, his expression inscrutable. The declaration of love hung in the air, a delicate vow amidst the storm. Arthur's face twisted into a mask of fury. You'll rue this, Vivienne, he hissed, his voice laced with malice. You'll regret choosing him over me. He spun on his heel and stormed away, his polished footwear stirring up dust as he vanished into the encroaching night. The crowd watched him depart, a collective sigh of relief sighing through them. They had stood as one, and they had prevailed. For the moment. The final stand Arthur's departure hadn't eased the strain. It had only compressed it into a tighter coil. Colt, jaw clenched, tracked the dissipating dust cloud marking Arthur's retreat. The townsfolk trickled away, murmuring platitudes to Vivienne, offering Colt clumsy backpats. Yet, she sensed the tremor vibrating through him, a tightly restrained fury she hadn't witnessed before. "Colt," she ventured, reaching for him. He recoiled, eyes like flint. "He'll be back. We'll meet him together," she insisted, her tone resolute. A clipped, mirthless sound escaped Colt's lips. "Together? You've no idea what you're saying, Vivienne." He pivoted and stalked toward the barn, his spine a rod of steel. Her heart ached as she followed. He was distancing himself, attempting to shield her. But the sting of his rejection cut deeper than any threat Arthur could deliver. Inside, the barn was redolent with hay and the comforting musk of horses. Colt was already at work, saddling Buck, his stallion. "Where are you going?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "To ensure he stays gone," he stated, his tone leaving no room for argument. "You can't confront him alone," Vivienne protested, her concern escalating to alarm. "He'll be backed by hired guns." Colt swung into the saddle, his face an impassive mask. "Then I'll be ready for them." "Colt, please," she implored, stepping closer, her hand outstretched. "Don't do this." "We can ride for the sheriff. Seek reinforcements." He glanced down at her, a flicker of tenderness in his gaze. "The long arm of the law can't reach as far as Arthur's coffers, Vivienne. This is a burden I must carry." Before she could utter another word, he spurred Buck, the stallion bolting into a gallop, leaving her in the swirling dust. She watched him vanish over the rise, a cold dread gripping her insides. She couldn't simply stand by. She had to act. Darting to the house, she seized Colt's rifle and swiftly saddled her own mare, Bess. She wasn't a seasoned marksman, but she knew how to wield a rifle, and she refused to let Colt face Arthur's wrath alone. As sunset painted the sky in fiery hues, casting elongated shadows across the terrain, she rode, urging Bess onward. Following Colt's trail, the distant sounds of raised voices and the sharp reports of gunfire finally reached her ears, quickening her pulse. Gripping the rifle tighter, she pressed Bess forward, cresting the hill. The scene unfolded before her. Colt and Arthur, embroiled in a savage confrontation. Arthur had employed thugs, hulking figures trying to overwhelm Colt through sheer numbers. Colt fought with ferocious intensity, a whirlwind of motion and deadly precision, but he was dangerously outnumbered. Vivienne raised her rifle, sighted, and fired. A grunt of pain echoed as one thug clutched his wounded arm and crumpled to the ground. Their attention shifted to her, affording Colt a precious respite. "Vivienne, get out of here," Colt roared, his voice raw. "Not without you," she retorted, squeezing off another shot. A second thug staggered and fell. Arthur, his face twisted in incandescent rage, drew a pistol and levelled it at Vivienne. Before she could react, Colt surged forward, intercepting the bullet with his shoulder. He faltered, clutching the wound, but remained upright. Vivienne screamed, firing a wild shot at Arthur, who recoiled, momentarily stunned by Colt's selfless act. The remaining thugs hesitated, uncertain. Seizing his chance, Colt lunged, knocking Arthur off his feet. He wrenched the pistol from his grasp, pinning him to the earth. "This ends now, Arthur," Colt seethed, his voice a low growl of fury. But before he could deliver the final blow, one of the thugs struck Colt from behind, plunging him into unconsciousness. Vivienne's scream tore through the air as she fired her last bullet, felling the attacker. She rushed to Colt's side, kneeling beside him. His face was ashen, his breathing shallow and laboured. Arthur, seizing the opportunity, scrambled up and vanished into the gathering darkness with his sole remaining henchman. Vivienne disregarded him. Colt was her only focus. She ripped a strip from her skirt and pressed it to his wound, desperately trying to staunch the flow of blood. Despite his weight, she managed to maneuver him onto Bess. The slow trek back to the ranch began, each hoofbeat a hammer blow against her heart. Colt teetered on the edge of consciousness, his body racked with pain. Vivienne maintained a constant stream of words, desperately trying to keep him anchored to the present. "Hold on, Colt," she pleaded. "We're nearly there. Just hold on." Finally, the familiar outline of the ranch house materialized. She somehow managed to get Colt inside and onto his bed. She worked with frantic energy, cleaning the wound, binding it tightly. A doctor was imperative, but the nearest one was hours away. She was alone. For days, Vivienne tended to Colt tirelessly. She spoon-fed him broth, changed his bandages with gentle care, and maintained a constant vigil at his bedside. Sleep became a forgotten luxury, her fear for him, her only sustenance. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Colt began to mend. The fever relinquished its grip, and lucidity returned to his eyes. He was feeble, but he was alive. One morning, she discovered him awake, watching her with clear, unwavering eyes. "Vivienne," he croaked, his voice raspy. "You saved my life. You saved mine first," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. He reached for her hand, his grip surprisingly firm. "I was wrong, Vivienne, about everything, about you, about us." "What do you mean?" she asked, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm. "I was afraid," he admitted, his voice barely a breath. "Afraid to care, afraid to love. But you proved it was worth the risk." Tears coursed down her cheeks. "Oh, Colt," she breathed, leaning down to kiss him softly. He drew her closer, his arms tightening around her. "I love you, Vivienne," he said, his voice brimming with emotion. "More than anything." "I love you too, Colt," she replied, her voice trembling with the weight of her emotions. "I always have." In that moment, lying in his bed, battered but alive, they forged a bond that transcended their pasts, their anxieties, their uncertainties. They had stared into the abyss together, and had emerged stronger, their commitment to one another unshakable. Arthur still lurked somewhere out there, a shadow looming on the horizon. But for now, within the haven of the ranch, they had found comfort, hope, and a love powerful enough to overcome any adversity. A new horizon. The hearth fire popped and snapped, scattering fractal patterns of light across the cabin's aged timbers. A comforting blend of resin and burning wood filled Vivienne's senses, a scent intrinsically linked to her newfound sanctuary. Colt's gaze held her captive, an unyielding intensity softened by time and hardship. The creases fanning from his eyes seemed less severe, carrying less of the world's weight. A low rumble escaped him as he cleared his throat. "Vivienne," he began, his voice raspy. "These weeks, these months, they've irrevocably altered me." He bridged the narrow gap between them, his weathered hand enveloping hers. Their fingers intertwined, a familiar and grounding connection. "You've transformed me too, Colt," she breathed, her voice thick with emotion. She had witnessed his rawest moments, his guarded silences, and everything in between. She'd seen his fortitude, his empathy, the deep well of sorrow he carried. And despite, or perhaps because of, it all, her love for him blazed. He tightened his grip, his eyes delving into hers. "I never imagined I'd experience this again. I believed that part of me had withered, vanished. His gaze dropped to their clasped hands. But you resurrected it. You revealed that hope wasn't foolish, that trust wasn't naive, that love remained possible. Vivienne's pulse hammered against her ribs, a wild tattoo echoing the anticipation blooming within. She sensed what was coming, a tangible energy in the air, the unwavering focus of his gaze, the gentle pressure of his palm. He lifted his head, his eyes reflecting a vulnerability rarely seen. "Vivienne Prescott," he stated, his voice laced with profound emotion. "Will you grant me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" The question shimmered in the air, freighted with promise and the gravity of a shared destiny. Tears blurred Vivienne's vision, yet she could still discern the nascent hope mirrored in Colt's eyes. "Yes," she whispered, a sigh of pure, unadulterated joy. "Yes, Colt Morrison, I will." A slow smile illuminated his face, a transformation that chased away the shadows of worry and replaced them with a radiant joy. Rising, he drew her up with him, enfolding her in a tight embrace. "I love you, Vivienne," he murmured into her hair, his voice thick. "I love you too, Colt," she replied, her own voice trembling. She held him close, burying her face against his chest, relishing the solid strength of his arms. In that moment, cocooned by the cabin's simple comforts, she knew she had found her rightful place. They lingered, entwined, cherishing the culmination of their arduous journey. The fire whispered its secrets, the wind howled a lonely song outside, but within the cabin, only warmth and serenity reigned. Finally, Colt drew back, framing her face with his hands. He studied her, his gaze brimming with tenderness and admiration. "We have our work cut out for us," he said, his voice regaining its familiar gravelly tone. "This ranch won't run itself on promises." Vivienne laughed, a bright melodic sound that resonated through the room. "I'm ready," she declared, her eyes sparkling with resolve. "I'm ready for anything, so long as I'm with you." He kissed her then, a deep, lingering kiss that sealed their vow, their commitment, their enduring love. It was a kiss that spoke of shared aspirations, of surmounting obstacles, of constructing a life together, stone by arduous stone, on the untamed canvas of the American West. The following dawn arrived crisp and vibrant, painting the eastern sky with streaks of rose and gold. Vivienne awoke with a feeling of expectation, a buoyancy she hadn't experienced in years. She donned her well-worn denim dress, the fabric soft from seasons of toil. Colt was already outside, attending to the horses. He glanced up at her approach, a smile tugging at his lips. Leaning against the corral fence, he watched her, his gaze filled with quiet appreciation. "Fancy a ride?" he inquired, gesturing towards the steeds. Vivienne grinned, her heart lifting. "Always." He saddled 2 horses with practiced efficiency. He assisted her onto her mare, his hand lingering a fraction too long at her waist. They departed the ranch side by side, their horses' hooves stirring up dust across the vast expanse of the open range. The sun warmed their faces, the wind tossed their hair, and the boundless landscape stretched before them, an invitation. They rode in comfortable silence, content in each other's presence, absorbing the grandeur of their surroundings. The drought had left its mark, the land was arid and cracked, yet a sense of tenacity, a glimmer of hope permeated the air. Reaching a high crest overlooking the valley, Colt reined in his horse. Vivienne drew up beside him, her gaze mirroring his. The valley unfolded beneath them, a tapestry of parched earth and resilient green, scarred by the dry spell yet still clinging to life. "This is it, Vivienne," he stated, his voice resonating with quiet pride. "This is our home. This is our future." Vivienne turned to him, her heart swelling with love. She reached for his hand, their fingers weaving together. "It's perfect," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "It's ours." He squeezed her hand, their eyes meeting. "We'll confront whatever trials lie ahead," he vowed, his voice firm with conviction. "Together." Vivienne nodded, her eyes gleaming with unwavering determination. "Together." As the sun began its descent, igniting the sky with fiery hues of orange and crimson, they guided their horses homeward. They rode shoulder to shoulder, their silhouettes etched against the brilliant sky, two figures united by love, by shared visions, by the promise of a fresh start. The future remained uncertain, the challenges considerable, but they confronted it as one, hand in hand, poised to forge a life, a haven, a legacy, on the rugged terrain of the American West. Vivienne had fled the gilded cage of a wealthy engagement only to unearth something infinitely more precious in the embrace of a wounded rancher, a love that mended, a purpose that resonated, and a life that was authentically her own. As they rode towards the setting sun, they understood their journey had only just commenced, and that together they possessed the strength to conquer any horizon.